When I first moved onto this lot, the dominant tree in the woods was chestnut oak, but around a quarter to a half of them were either dead or declining from English ivy and erosion. Over the years, I've been thinning out the dying ones and getting more good trees established in their place. This one is over 3-foot diameter above the root flare and at least 70 feet tall. Last winter, I had a few more removed. Look at this one. This was one of my favorite trees on the property, but the canopy was about 50% died back, and it was starting to drop limbs, and it was just way too close to the house. Here's another one. Look at all the English ivy on the trunk. From that round of tree removals, I had them pile up the logs in a deck by the driveway. I've been chainsaw milling and using this wood slowly, but I don't want to leave the pile like this for too long. There's just too much risk of bugs. So the plan is to have a portable sawmill come out, and we'll mill it all in a couple days and get it stacked. And once it's dry and stored properly, it'll last for as long as I need it to. One important thing to think about for where to position your log deck is that unless you have a piece of equipment that can pick up the logs, you'll have to be rolling them with a peavey. And as a result, you'll need to be able to get the mill parallel to the deck so you can just roll them straight on. Here the plan is to set up the mill right there in the driveway. Some of the bigger logs, green, weigh well over a ton. So, yeah, it's something to really think about. Chestnut oak is in the white oak family, and in this region it's just sold as white oak. So, meaning if you buy white oak, sometimes it's chestnut oak, sometimes it's bur oak, sometimes it's pin oak, and sometimes it's just regular white oak and Quercus alba. The most attractive characteristic of white oak is the medullary rays, which are the white, shiny rays that run perpendicular to the grain. These are most prominent when the log is quarter sawn, which means slices taken radial from the center. And more on that later, how that's actually achieved. This slab I chainsaw milled and air dried and then flattened on my flattening jig. I sometimes like to leave a few chainsaw marks in the finished piece, just as a reminder of where it came from and a nice tactile thing. And here's another piece I finished recently with some really nice quarter sawn grain showing on the top. The straight grain and the overall toughness also makes it a really good wood for steam bending, as you may have seen on my previous video. So between the good looks, the toughness, and the general practicality, there's an awful lot to like about white oak. So, on to the milling. This is my friend Andy with the portable sawmill. He was fantastic. If you're doing this, get yourself a good sawyer. Find someone that will give the level of attention your logs need. If you're making pine 2x4s, maybe it doesn't matter as much, but if you have a valuable pile of logs, a bad judgment call could be really disappointing. Every log is unique, and there's about a million different ways you could saw it. You could flat saw, you could quarter saw, you could do live edge, you could do any thickness. You could do beams, you could do live edge on one side and square it on the other. I'll be explaining a lot of those choices throughout the video, but the key takeaway is that you want to think ahead to your projects that you'll be using them for, and figure out what features you care about, and then communicate that to your sawyer, who will help you grade each log and then mill it to maximize those features. I had an Amish helper, a friend of the family, to help with stacking and other labor. I'm being careful not to show his face on here out of respect for their rules, but I have to acknowledge how awesome this guy was. I used to work odd jobs like this when I was his age, and he would work circles around me. There's a ton of work with all the milling byproducts. The flitches, which are the mostly bark pieces, need to get cut up into firewood and hauled away. Sawdust, same thing, and stacking is no joke either. This guy was always looking for the next thing to do, never in the way, and just awesome to work with. This is how much we were able to mill by the end of the first day. We got a couple 4x6 beams, a couple 6x6 beams, but mostly 5/4 and 8/4 lumber. Some live edge and some squared on one side. The benefit of squaring up one side on the mill is that if you know you're going to be using the lumber as S4S, surfaced on 4 sides, having that one edge squared up will save you a track saw cut on each piece and turn that into just a couple jointer passes, which is a lot more efficient for me. But then on the other hand, if you decide that you do want to use the live edge for something, you have one live edge, which is all you need for most projects. Like, think about the bookshelf I showed earlier, or shelving that goes up against a wall, or, even something like the desk I'm sitting at right now. Oh, hi. The other thing you have to think about is what thicknesses you mill to. Milling is usually done in 1/4 inch increments, so 8/4, like you see here, is 2 inches, and 5/4, which is the other thickness I milled to, is 1 1/4 inches. You also have to figure that you'll lose a percentage of thickness to warping as it dries. So I'm expecting to get 1-inch boards out of my 5/4 and anywhere between 1.5 to 1 3/4 out of the 8/4. Thicker boards give you more flexibility in that you can resaw them to other thicknesses as needed, but it's nice to have a mixture of thick and thin boards off the mill to minimize the chance you'll need to do heavy resawing like this.
Oh, I milled it too thick, and now I gotta do this 25 more times, and this'll take till Wednesday. Then I gotta clean up the bandsaw marks, and this thing won't fit through my perlaner, and maybe I'll get my result.
Got out a little extra early the second day so I could catch up on some of the grunt work. We ended the day yesterday by rolling this 36-inch diameter log, that's one of the larger ones, onto the mill. The plan was to start the day by taking our time and quarter sawing it. This sawdust here goes over to the garden where we use it for weed suppression and ultimately compost. My wife also makes these really nice incense cones out of it by mixing it with xanthan gum. There was a little bit of stacking to catch up on, because at the end of the first day, the tractor developed this issue with its ignition key, and it was stuck where it was with these boards. This morning I was able to bypass the ignition issue by hot wiring the starter motor to just get it running, and then I left it running all day. It was quite a relief to get it running, because no tractor, no milling. I was also impressed that it ran for 10 hours and only used half a tank of diesel. I also caught up on my favorite milling activity, which is cutting up these flitches into firewood. It's pretty rough. You want to have a stack of flitches so that you can cut through the first couple of them and then use the bottom one as a backstop so you don't hit the ground. I did this all day yesterday and this without ever hitting the ground. The chain stayed razor sharp. I just touched it up a few times. It was pretty miraculous. So now everything is cleaned up and ready for the second day. I don't have any help this day, so Andy and I are just going to let the flitches and sawdust pile up around us and just focus on the milling. So here we get to take a closer look at the actual methodology Andy used to quarter saw this log. So to start with, we had to cut the painted ends off the log. The whole point of quarter sawing is to get boards that have grain that runs vertical within the board. Another way of visualizing that is that you want the boards to be taken as radial as possible from the heart center or pith of the tree. And the heart center is not actually centered in the tree if the tree grows on any kind of lean. And here we're cutting off the root flares just to let it roll better. And yeah, you can see how off-center the pith is, but the log itself is pretty straight, which is good. So typical quarter sawing, as the name implies, starts with quartering the log. You cut it in half, and then you cut those halves in half, right down the heart center. And then there are all these techniques for how to take those quarters and then saw them to get straight grain boards. So there's a method where you flip-flop the quarter back and forth and take the flat face each time. The first two boards are perfectly quarter sawn, and then they get smaller and less quarter sawn as you go. There's another method where you just prop the quarter up on a 45-degree angle and flat saw it. So there the middle board is perfectly quarter sawn, and the ones above and below it are decreasing in size and grain straightness. So those two methods are considered pretty much equal in terms of yield and quality. Then there's this method that's extremely low yield, but gives you perfectly quarter sawn boards, where you sort of rotate it around a few degrees at a time, cutting out a piece of waste and then cutting out a board. Again, getting every board perfectly quarter sawn, but a lot of waste. But you might be looking at the screen right now and correctly observing that we're not quartering the log. So, what is this? This is a method that starts by cutting the log into an octagon. The octagon gives you a reference face at every 45-degree increment, and then there's a series of repeatable setups that use those faces so that you're always cutting boards within 22.5 degrees of perfectly quarter sawn. The main advantage of this method is the repeatable nature of the setups, and the fact that you don't have to handle 4/4 of the log. There's a little bit more time put into the setup of making the octagon, but then once you have the octagon, it goes pretty quick. The method for making an octagon is to start by making a square and then cutting the 4 corners off. Cutting the first corner off is the most critical cut because you have no references. The key factors is that you're 45 degrees off the bed, and that the heart center is still parallel to the cut plane. You can then use that face to cut the other 3 corners off, and then you end up with this octagon. The next step is cutting the octagon in half. The important thing is that it goes through the heart center. Then you pick a half to start working on, and you can cut off the large face, and that entire thing is quarter sawn. It was worth taking a minute to stop and admire this piece, and also verify that we're getting what we expect. So it turns out I didn't take a picture of that exact piece, but it looked something like this. It had perfectly straight grain and really nice fleck, so we moved on. So the next cut is to take this top triangle off of the octagon. This piece is usually thought of as waste, but I don't see any reason why you wouldn't keep it for chair legs or something like that. And then the next couple cuts are just straight quarter sawn lumber. Then you rotate it another 45 degrees using what used to be the large face of the octagon up against the rear fence of the mill. There's another so-called waste triangle piece here, followed by 3 or 4 good boards. Then you're just left with this little thing. I've lost track of what side's what, but there's a couple good boards in there. So we just repeated that on the other half, worked our way through the rest of the pile of logs, finished up before dark, and left the stacking and flitches and sawdust for another day. Yeah, definitely a pleasure working with Andy. I look forward to having him back when I have more logs. So this pile over here on the right is what we milled on the second day, and weren't able to stack because it was just the two of us. And here's how much sawdust we ended up with. It's pretty good. And then there's the firewood, and there's the flitches that remain to be cut into firewood. Some of those pieces are actually kind of cool. I might save a few for outdoor benches and stuff like that. My wife helped with the stacking, even though she's 4 months pregnant in this footage. She's still a huge help, though. And you might notice the pile of stickers we're using down there on the ground is diminishing, and we ended up running out of those. I had to cut more. So I thought I'd show you how I made them. It's a very cheap and simple method. So the important things in a sticker is that it needs to be at least 1 inch thick to allow for airflow. It needs to have low moisture content because moisture will invite fungus, and the fungus will cause sticker stain. So air-dried or kiln-dried lumber is preferred, and pressure-treated won't work because the chemicals will also cause a stain. And then a 4-foot length is pretty easy to work with. So the way I went about this is I bought a bunch of 2x6x8 construction lumber, kiln-dried, and I start by just cutting them in half to 4 feet. That just makes handling a little bit easier. You could definitely rip them down first, but I chose to do it this way. And then you just take those 2x6x4 sections and start ripping them into 1-inch strips. Every saw kerf is 1/8 of an inch, and you'll end up making 4 cuts. So 4 cuts times 1/8 of an inch kerf is 1/2 of an inch. So your 5.5 inch width that you started with, minus the 1/2 inch that you lose in saw kerf, gives you an even 5 1-inch strips. So in total, you get 10 stickers per 2x6x8. So I ended up paying $7.19 per 2x6, so per sticker, it ends up being about 72 cents. So I'm just sitting here running the entire pile of 2x6s through at a time. Once I finish the pile, I go and I restack everything, reset the saw, move the saw to the work, not the work to the saw, and then just run them all through again. You only have to repeat the setup 4 times to get the 5 stickers. Alright, now that I have more stickers again, I can finish the stacking. So I'm putting all the quarter saw material together in that tall stack in the middle, and then I have the live edge and other flat sawn stuff on the left, and then miscellaneous stuff including poles and then this one poplar log we milled. That's all going on the right. In a perfect world, it would be nice to have different stacks for different thicknesses, because A, it'd keep the stacking all compatible within a stack, and B, different thicknesses will be ready at different times. You're supposed to give it all a year per inch. So that's what I'm doing back there. I'm thinking about all these constraints. I decided to just bury some of the 5/4 underneath 8/4, and I'll just dig it out if I have to. Alright, so we're in the home stretch here. One of the last steps is to put some kind of covering on it. Some people use pressure-treated plywood, some people use metal roof panels. I found tarps with just random pieces of wood to weigh it down to be the cheapest and easiest thing just based on what I have available. The important thing is to keep the sun off of it. The sun will make the ends check. It's also helpful if you can position the stack somewhere in part shade where it gets good airflow. And then the final thing is to seal up the ends. This will keep the sun off the ends, but more importantly, it'll cover up the ends of the grain and slow down the drying. When wood dries too fast, that's when it cracks and warps and stuff. So this is literally just there to slow it down. Any paint will work. I just used old junk latex paint, There are these like specialized lumber drying sealants out there, but don't waste your money. Anything that slows down the water is going to be fine. And that's all there is to it. Thanks for watching.